A new poll has found that the rioting we have seen unfolding in American cities across the country over the last few months is driving voters directly into the hands of Trump, and this should surprise absolutely no one. Hey everyone, it's Mike LaChance of the Legal Insurrection blog. If you haven't already done so, please subscribe to my channel. Feel free to leave a comment. I'd love to hear your opinion, and feel free to rate this video. All right, let's read this. This is from Rasmussen Reports. It was released 2 days ago. Trump's the choice for voters who've experienced violent protests. 3 out of 4 voters who've had violent anti-police protests in their community rate those protests important to their vote in the presidential election. Among those voters, a sizable majority like the job President Trump is doing. The latest Rasmussen Reports national telephone and online survey finds that 42% of likely U.S. voters have had anti-police protests in their community this summer. Nearly half, 48% of these voters, say that the protests in their community have turned violent. Among all voters, 65% say the violent protests are important to their vote in the presidential election this fall, with 41% who say it's very important. Among those who have had violent protests in their community, even more, 76%, rate them important to their vote, including 54% who say they are very important. 63% of these voters strongly approve of the job Trump is doing versus 35% who strongly disapprove. Now, who could have seen this coming? And it's important to note that at the Democratic National Convention, which happened just a few weeks ago, no one even mentioned the subject of the rioting. It never came up even once. In fact, it wasn't until a couple of weeks later, when the rioting started to have a negative impact on Joe Biden's polling, that he mentioned it. And it was amazing because on one night, you had Don Lemon of CNN saying, this is starting to affect poll numbers and Joe Biden really needs to get out in front of this. And 24 hours later, Joe Biden was making a statement about it, basically taking his marching orders from CNN. It's also funny that other Democrats started to finally speak out about it, but laughably tried to pin it on Trump, which is just ridiculous because the Democrats own this completely. We all watched over the summer as they were silent. I mean, if they did say anything about the riots, they were egging them on, basically encouraging it. Even Kamala Harris went on the Colbert Show and said that the riots, or the protests as she called them, were going to keep going. Here's the problem for Democrats. Most Americans want nothing to do with this. Most of your average Americans want to come home from work, have dinner, talk to their spouse, talk to their kids, pay their bills. They're worried about things like, am I going to have to do a major repair on my home in the next 6 months? Am I going to have to replace a vehicle in the next 6 months? They want nothing to do with riots, and they want nothing to do with mobs of people yelling at people who are trying to eat dinner at a sidewalk cafe. So this is a real problem for the Democrats. And the other thing to consider is that this is all coming from cities. So these riots have been happening in New York City, Portland, Seattle, Minneapolis, and then even Rochester, New York, and Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Now, what happens when some of these voters in these deep blue cities, which are, the Democrats really count on these cities to deliver a solid blue vote. What happens when some of these voters in the cities start voting for Trump? What happens if, in Minnesota, most people already expect that Minnesota is pretty much in play and that Trump could win Minnesota, based partly on what happened, in Minneapolis, but also because he came very close to winning the state in 2016. But what happens if Trump manages to flip New York State red, or Oregon, or Washington State? It would be a political earthquake, and people in our political media class would be stunned, but it would all be based on what you can see in this report from Rasmussen. And finally, someone else must have looked at the polling data, because Nancy Pelosi, as of today, was even speaking out against it. Let's take a look. Here's Nancy Pelosi on the House floor. Let's see what she has to say about riots.
distinguished leader spoke, the gentleman on the other side said, "Where are you when you're talking about violence, this or that?" We're there. We support peaceful demonstrations. We participate in them. They are part of the essence of our democracy. That does not include looting, starting fires, or rioting. They should be prosecuted.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. Might have been nice if you said that, 3 months ago, before American cities were basically destroyed by rioters. This is a serious problem for Democrats, and they're going to pay a heavy price for it in November. They certainly deserve to, but we'll see. We'll all know very shortly. Anyway, again, please subscribe to this channel if you haven't done so already. Thanks. Have a great night. I'll see you all tomorrow.